Hi, everybody. I'm Derek, and I am a real alcoholic. And I say real alcoholic because in chapter 3, more about alcoholism, it says most of us have been unwilling to admit we were real alcoholics. So, to differentiate a real alcoholic from an alcoholic, I'm not going to go into a lot of that, but there are 4 descriptions of the alcoholic. If you have your big book handy as we're going through step 12, and we're going to be focusing on step 12, I'm going to be flipping back and forward through the book, so it might be useful for you to have your big book there and you can follow along on some of these stuff. And as it applies to me, it obviously applies to you. So I'd like to share my experience based on the book and how it transformed my life. So I had 11 years in Alcoholics Anonymous. 3 of those were without drinking in the early portion of my foray into AA. And for the last 8 years of that period, I was unable to stop drinking at all because I was suffering from an obsession of the mind that was condemning me to drink against my will. So if you look at the 4 different types of alcoholics, I'm trying to remember where it is. It's listed out in the book somewhere. Can't remember now where it is. But they list these alcoholics, the guy who's just starting off and, has a kind of a bad problem, the 2nd stage of alcoholism, the 3rd stage of alcoholism, and then the 4th stage of alcoholism. These four stages are described in detail within the big book. Practically know this thing by heart, and off the top of my head here, let's see where it is. It doesn't jump out. It doesn't jump out. So no worries. But the bottom line was alcohol for me was more than a habit. And the requirement for membership in Alcoholics Anonymous is a desire to stop drinking. The requirement for membership in Alcoholics Anonymous is not to be an alcoholic. You don't have to be an alcoholic to be a member of AA. You just have to have a desire to stop drinking. And these first 100 men and women, along with Bill, who became the forerunners of what today is known as Alcoholics Anonymous, were all real alcoholics. They had reached what we call low bottom. They had reached a place of utter and complete deflation. And although they had a tremendous desire to stop drinking, it was of absolutely no use and no avail. And I'm that type of alcoholic. That's the real alcoholic. There are many people who are certain kinds of hard drinkers who are members of AA. They really don't need to get sober on a spiritual basis. They can get sober, or they can be without alcohol by relying on meetings, fellowship activities, and all of that kind of stuff. And the result is many of these actually will advance during their period of sobriety into the death of real alcoholism. Some disaster will occur when they're about 20 years sober or something like that. Not everybody, or maybe 15 years or 10 years, whatever it is. And they're unable to cope with it. They find themselves drinking again. Then they return to what they think is the program of Alcoholics Anonymous and find themselves unable to stop based on that. I'm sure you know many, many people if you attend meetings in AA. They're usually known by meeting makers make it, just don't drink, all of that kind of stuff. So the problem is when a person like that who may have 50 years sobriety, 50 years without a drink, but is not a real alcoholic, tries to work with a real alcoholic, he can never understand him. And so you get a tremendous failure rate going on. So I want to talk to you about the basis of AA, which is a spiritual program of recovery from a hopeless condition of mind and body. And that's the first line in the addendum to the first edition. Very, very first page. We of Alcoholics Anonymous are more than 100 men and women who have recovered from a seemingly hopeless state of mind and body. And they have recovered. They're not in the process of recovering. They're recovered. And they no longer have this obsession of the mind that's condemning them to drink against their will, which is the hopeless state of mind. They may have the phenomena of craving still existing in their body because they have an allergic reaction to alcohol, but it becomes a moot point when the obsession is gone. That's the symptoms of alcoholism. Behind that lies the reasons why we drink. And alcoholism is a disease of thinking. Most alcoholics, I've never worked with anyone who has not been traumatized in some way during their youth. And eventually, this thinking in their mind becomes obsessive. They cannot express themselves fully, and they turn to alcohol as a solution. And we often talk about the committee in AA and putting the committee asleep. And that's what alcohol does. It kills the problem in the mind. So when you stop drinking as an alcoholic, what you're going to face immediately is alcoholism. It's not that things get better when a real alcoholic stops drinking. May get better for a while, physically, just a little bit. But then over the next 6 months to a year, things get absolutely miserable because alcohol is the finest medication ever devised for the treatment of alcoholism. It really works. And when that treatment is taken away, alcoholism is full blown. And you find all the symptoms of that listed on page 52. These are the symptoms that exist when you're not drinking. And it says on page 52, we were having trouble with personal relationships. We couldn't control our emotional natures. We're prey to misery and depression, full of fear. We couldn't seem to be of real help to other people. We were unhappy. And these are all the symptoms that start to manifest when we're not drinking. Eventually, that turns us into literally insanity. Look at your own lives and think about alcoholics you've known. In the years that I was very, very active, I'm still very, very active in AA, most of the suicides that I encountered were encountered by people who were not drinking. So if alcohol was their problem, why did they off themselves? It was the thinking. This is a disease of thinking. That's why we say, do we not in step 3, relieve me of the bondage of self? The bondage of self is this crazy thinking mind, this ego, this splintered part of a whole mind that drives us nuts. So having said that, let's look at step 12. And on page 88, in the chapter Into Action, we finish on step 11. And the next page, 89, is working with others. It doesn't say step 12. It's just left there. It's floating. So in addressing step 12, we better understand what step 12 is all about. And basically, what step 12 is the summation of all of the steps that have gone before. It is the results of steps 1 through 11. So it encapsulates steps 1 through 11. It encapsulates the principles of AA, which are the steps. You often hear people saying, well, there's this principle and that principle. There are 12 spiritual principles in AA. If you go back to where the steps are mentioned, it says on page 60, I believe it is, it says, the principles we have set down are guides to progress. See, no one among us has been able to maintain anything like perfect adherence to these principles. And earlier on, it says the principles we have set down are guides to progress. And these are the 12 principles. Now, since then, people have expanded into all sorts of other things. But when this book came out, these were the 12 principles that we live by. Now, many people think you work the steps and that's it. The steps are a way of life, a new way of life. The turning point is when you've been walking in a certain direction, you stop and you become willing to turn in a different direction. And that different direction is towards God. And what this textbook is about is how to get an expansion of consciousness, how to transform yourself and come into a real relationship with the divine. I have found over the years that my idea of God has been transformed amazingly from a person more to a force, an inexplicable force that is manifested in various people throughout the world in absolutely incredible ways. Jesus was one of those, Buddha is another, Krishna was another, and I'm sure there's many other awakened beings who have achieved that status. So we hold within us some incredible power that we're totally unaware of. We live in a state of absolute blind ignorance most of the time. And ignorance, I think, is the real enemy of mankind. So let's look at what the 12 steps says. It says, having had a spiritual awakening as the result of these steps, as a result of practicing these principles. Now, the original text stated in the first edition, having had a spiritual experience as the result of these steps, a small thing, it's the same thing. So the first idea phrase that's contained in the 12 steps is having had a spiritual awakening as a result of these steps. So the first thing to ask yourself is, have you? And you will know it if you have. A spiritual awakening is not just a flash of light, or a spiritual experience is not some temporary situation. It could be like going to the fireworks display on the 4th of July and then coming out when the fireworks display is over, it's over. But a physical, spiritual awakening is a transformation of the inner mind into an expanded state of consciousness, where you look at the world in a totally different way. You look the same on the outside to everybody else, but inside, your inner awareness of things are vastly different. Your perspective is different. You begin to see the wholeness of life, the integration of life as a whole. So the first thing to remember is this is a constant process of transformation of consciousness that's going on here. And that's the first phase of step one. The second stage is we try to carry this message to alcoholics. Again, in the first edition, it says we try to carry this message to others, especially alcoholics. This message was meant for the world, not just for alcoholics. And we say in the preamble to our meeting here, we welcome anyone and everyone interested in a spiritual way of life. So the message is the message of expansion of consciousness, of the transformation of the mind, which leads to a transformation of the life, which in time will lead to the transformation of the world. This is the message that's really contained here. Transformation of the mind, leading to a transformation of the life, leading to a transformation of the world. And that's what our world needs now more than anything else like this. You cannot isolate yourself from politics or what's going on around you and expect to be part of this world. We alcoholics need to be up on the firing line of life, doing all we can. And the next statement, and to practice these principles in all our affairs. Now, what does that mean, in all our affairs? That means in politics, and who you elect and who you don't elect. That means in taking responsibility for your life and how it affects others. That means in your marriages. That means in your single life. That means in every single aspect of your imprint that you place on this earth, you practice these principles in all your affairs, all of them, and all leaves out nothing. You don't just go to an AA meeting, sound wise and wonderful, and then go back and start, beating your wife, stealing. These are obvious things. But the major aspects is, have you taken responsibility for what's going on in your world? Have you taken responsibility for what's going on in your town, in your village, and who you elect as your representative? It starts with you. Have you become responsible for yourself? Have you checked yourself in your movements during the day, in the course of the day, what you're doing and what you're not doing? How are you transforming yourself? It states here on page 60, we claim spiritual progress rather than spiritual perfection. So can you claim spiritual progress or can't you? If you're honest with yourself, and the most wonderful thing is to say, well, no, I'm not doing that. Great. Now you can do something about it. The wonderful statement that alcoholics don't really use it very much is, I don't know. That's an amazing statement, because if you can admit you know nothing, you learn everything. And it's that statement and the pride in one's ego and one's opinion and one's personality and all of those things that keep people divided. It's divided religions. It's divided countries. It's divided people all over the world. Fear divides and love always gathers together. And here in step 12, we have the perfect recipe of what love is, the gathering together, not the pushing apart. We see it all over the world. And anyone who wants to control anybody first separates them, differentiates them. Religious groups, white groups, black groups, green groups, yellow groups. All of this division is fear. Divide people and conquer them. Are we practicing these principles in all our affairs? And the underlying principle of all is that is placing principle before personality. And the principle we're talking about here is the divine principle that resides within everybody. The personality is that aspect called the ego. And everybody's personality is different. If I say I'm Derek, I'm a man, I'm da 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 da, I'm this, I'm that, I'm the other, that's merely an ego statement. People often you ask them who they are and they give you your occupation. I'm a barber, I'm a doctor, I'm a lawyer, I'm a carpenter, I'm a construction worker. You're none of those things. You are spirit, whole, complete, and perfect now, living in this body vehicle. In my case, I'm now in the winter years and this thing is wearing out. And all the usual things start happening, illnesses, disease, things that come along, you know. But my awareness is not in this physical vehicle that has served me some 75 years. My awareness is within and the spirit that resides within me, which is eternal. That's my identity, and that's your identity. And that is the divine principle before personality. So when you see someone, don't get involved with the personality. Your personality is going to be different from his personality. He's got a black personality, a white personality. He's a Catholic, he's a Protestant, he's this, he's that, he's Swedish, he's German, he's Irish, he's English, he's American, he's well, you're none of those things. You are that from which all proceeds from. You are part of the divine. One of the most amazing statements of all, I think, occurs on page 55, where Bill identifies this power and gives its location. And he says in the paragraph there, actually, we were fooling ourselves, for deep down in every man, woman, and child is the fundamental idea of God. It may be obscured by calamity, by pomp, by worship of other things, but in some form or other, it is there. So there he gives you the location, and that location is blocked. The calamity, the pomp, the worship of other things are the ego, brain, mind stuff that's blocking you from the awareness of the spirit that you really, truly are. You're not aware of it. It says, and it goes on, we finally saw that faith in some kind of God was a part of our makeup, just as much as the feeling we have for a friend. Sometimes we had to search fearlessly, but he was there. So he is saying that God is a part of our makeup. And if God is a part of our makeup, then our makeup is a part of God. We are not separate from God. You are one with God now. The only thing blocking your awareness of that fact is the ego thinking consciousness. And then it says, we found the great reality deep down within us. There's the location. In the last analysis, after analyzing all over the place and looking everywhere, it is only there that he may be found. Only means nowhere else. That means God is deep down within you. You are a part of God and God is a part of you. In other words, you are that. And you are an individuation of the divine seeking to go back and rejoin with the divine. That's what this whole journey of life is all about. And in my experience, having been born a Catholic in Ireland, now living on the west coast of California, it has gone on through countless lifetimes, lifetime after lifetime after lifetime after lifetime. Study the history of the Catholic Church. You'll find the doctrine of origin in the 5th century talk openly about, reincarnation. Remember, Jesus didn't come from New York, he came from the East, where that belief was very, very common and very, very accepted. So what does all that have to do with the 12th step? All right, well, having had a spiritual awakening as a result of these steps, what do we do? Well, the first thing in getting to this place of spiritual awakening is obviously the working of the steps. But of great importance while you're working the steps, and this probably goes against a lot of things that most people have learned throughout the years, I have found that it's imperative to start working with others right from the gate. When I take somebody through a preamble and then start taking them through the doctor's opinion and explaining things through them, I ask them to go out and find somebody else and take them through that same process. And I will not go any further with anyone until they do that. Why? Because the knowing of anything, the knowing of any spiritual truth or anything for that matter, is of absolutely no avail unless the living of that is built into the consciousness at once. Otherwise, it becomes disarrayed and gone. So you do not teach because you know something. You teach somebody else to learn. That's why working with others is so important. It breaks the constraints of the ego and starts to open the mind. It takes us out of this domination of the ego into this more expanded state of consciousness. Anyone who's working these steps and has started working with others right from the gate and has done this will tell you the feeling they get and that liberation. And it's specifically mentioned if you go to the doctor's opinion on let's see, on Roman numeral XXV, Roman numeral 25. And right there where Dr. Silkworth is talking, he says, in the course of his third treatment, and this is Bill Wilson, I believe there were actually 4 treatments that Bill went to a Towns hospital, but it doesn't really matter. He acquired certain ideas concerning a possible means of recovery, and these were spiritual ideas that he acquired from the Oxford group. As part of his rehabilitation, as part of him getting well, he commenced to present his conceptions to other alcoholics, impressing upon them that they must do likewise with still others. So here's Bill in the course of his third treatment, working with others right away, talking about the Oxford group principles and impressing upon people they must do likewise with still others. This has become the basis of a rapidly growing fellowship of these men and their families. Now, after 11 years in AA, I did not get sober in AA. I got sober because an alcoholic took the time to explain to me something I was completely unaware of. All those years in AA and all those 11 years in the group I belonged to in Northern California and in Southern California, I was totally under the impression that I had a power of choice over the first drink. And this is reinforced by many of the people I met at that time at meetings who said, I guess you just chose to drink. Just don't pick up the first drink and you don't get drunk. I don't have a power of choice over the first drink. You see, I had a hopeless condition of mind, but I didn't know it. So here I was going through all of this situation. And this man, when he explained this to me, the light bulb went off. And he worked with me at a workshop, and I went through the steps with him, or actually one of the people he had worked with. And I proceeded to do the same with still others. So for many, many years, I really didn't attend many meetings of Alcoholics Anonymous because I spent my days working with others and would go to AA meetings when I was asked to speak. But AA meetings didn't become the basis of my sobriety. And if you believe for a moment that when you drink again, you get the solution, well, I guess he's not going to enough meetings, then you believe meetings are the source of your salvation. They're not. Meetings are a fellowship organization, which are wonderful to attend. We're doing it right now. We have a great time together, highlight of my life in many respects. But this is not the program of AA. This is not the transformation of the mind. And you can sit around like a lump on a log for many, many years in AA and nothing's going to happen. They say, don't quit before the magic happens. Well, if we all had broken kneecaps and we spent 12 years in Broken Kneecaps Anonymous talking about our broken kneecaps, nothing would happen. It would mend in some distorted fashion, and we'd all walk around with a limp congratulating each other how long we've been members, Oh, I'm 30 years since I had my broken kneecap, And those with the longest amount of time with broken kneecaps, they'd be the winners, And that's absolutely insanity, There's nobody walking around with perfect limbs, that have healed because they took no program of action to address the problem, which was the broken kneecap, And you can sit around AA meetings until your ass gets sore, trying to stop drinking when drinking isn't the problem at all. Drinking is only the symptom of the problem. The real problem is the thinking, the mind. That's what you need to get to. And the book is very clear about that. Again, it says in chapter 2, I think there's a solution. The main problem of the alcoholic centers in the mind and not in the body. And what do? We don't try to congratulate people and give them tokens for regaining their sanity. Oh, it's been 5 years since this guy got sane, In fact, what you often see in AA is many, many old timers getting progressively more and more insane, more and more screwed up, more and more toxic. more and more absolutely crippling people. There is nothing, it says, the book often says, an alcoholic in his cups is an unlovely creature. An unrecovered alcoholic with what he calls long-term sobriety, which is long-term not drinking, is also one of the most unloveliest characters you may meet, you know? So this is the minefield that you must navigate through in AA to come to this spiritual awakening, this process of transformation of the mind. That's what we're being asked to do. So, and it says, we tried to carry this message to others. And the term tried is probably very apropos because I know quite a few of you here, and many of you spent many years working with other alcoholics, and it is a trying experience, and also the most rewarding experience you'll ever have. Because to take somebody out of that awful toxic place, before I came into a spiritual awakening, the only thing I could do in working with others was take a person to a meeting. That's all I knew how to do. Now, that was a kind act. And it may have in time saved his life, who the heck knows? But have you got the ability to sit down with a real alcoholic and take him to a place of spiritual enlightenment? Have you or haven't you? If you haven't, then you've got work to do. And you've no business going anywhere near anybody until you do. You have to be able to take somebody from the depths of despair and lead them out. Not give them a ride, that's a nice thing to do. Not send them to a meeting, that's a nice thing to do. But to actually take him through a process of transformation that will produce a spiritual awakening. You either have that ability or you don't have the ability. That's the ability to carry the message. Now, if you don't have it, go back through the steps, find somebody who does, work with them until you do. That's what it means to have a spiritual awakening. Can you carry this message? Are you able to? There's no great shame in not being able to, but the real great shame is pretending that you have to. Well-intentioned people in Alcoholics Anonymous damn near killed me. They meant well, but they had no solution. They just talked about spiritual things. They pointed at certain things, but they weren't able to take me through a process of transformation until I met somebody who could do that. And that's the person you want to find. There's quite a few people sitting in the room right now who know that ability. So we try to practice these principles and carry this message to others, and to practice these principles in all our affairs. And I've stated what all of our affairs are. When you become transformed in this awakening, you become a light unto the darkness. Remember, you can see one match glowing in a stadium. That's all you need. One light will glow in a stadium. And you do not destroy darkness by shoveling out darkness. You destroy darkness by bringing in the light. And that's what our world is in desperate need of right now, the bringing in of the light. Many people are totally ignorant and unaware of the agenda that's occurring now in our world. There are those who want to keep the status quo as it is and change it into something absolutely horrible. And it does not include spirituality. It does not include God. It does not include any of the things we hold sacred. God is freedom. Freedom is love, and love is God. All these things are inseparable. You can only practice spiritual growth in a free society. So are we practicing these principles in all our affairs? Are you staying quiet in a conversation when you know you should be speaking up? Are you agreeing with other people by omitting what's really in your heart? Are you being honest, or are you being dishonest? Are you really standing up? Are you living in fear, or are you living in love? And if you're living in fear, start putting it down on your inventory. Are you afraid of what's going on in our world right now? Write about it, inventory about it. If you feel moved, make a difference. What the world needs now is a spiritual awakening on a global scale, not just in AA, but in all our affairs. That was Bill's dream. This thing extends far beyond alcoholism, far beyond our illness. It extends into every aspect of our lives. We need to be the transformative element in our world and in our own lives. And we cannot do that unless we ourselves are transformed. You don't need years, you don't need 10 years, 20 years, or anything. This can happen very, very quickly if you're sincere and you want to transform yourself. All of these steps carry promises, which are basic results of what happens when certain things are done. And they're like milestones, markers along the way. And they all have action with them. You know, we start off with belief, for example, and you add action to belief or add action to hope, and it will turn into belief. And you'll see the promises of all of that on page 63, just before you take the third step. It finishes up, we felt new power flow in, we enjoyed peace of mind. We began to lose our fear of today, the tomorrow, the hereafter. We were reborn. We were reborn into a new state of consciousness. It's the beginning of it. And then we make the decision in step 3, do we not, to move on with this process, to remove the blocks within us that are blocking us from the awareness of this great reality deep down within us, and we proceed in that. Promises to the 4th step. Then come the promises of the 5th step on page 75, walking on the broad highway. As this belief now turns into more action and produces knowing. The knowing in turn with more action, which is the whole process of the chapter into action, which contains steps 5 through 11, all in one chapter, 5 to 11. 6 of the steps are right there. And that finishes with the promises of the 8th, 10th step, the promises of the 11th step. And then the summation of all of that, as I've described, lies in the 12th step program. We then go out in a new awareness. And as we go and we practice this as a way of life, the working with others, the constantly checking of ourselves. Step 10 is really the practicing of the presence within us. Continue to watch, it says, for selfishness, dishonesty, resentment, and fear. These are in step page 85. It says when they crop up, not if they crop up. What do? We resolutely turn our thinking to someone we can help. We make amends quickly if we've harmed anybody. And then it says love and tolerance of others is our code. So this is continuing to watch, keeping the plate clean as much as we can on a daily basis, you know. And then through prayer and meditation as a way of life, we deepen that relationship with this power that we've come into conscious awareness of, which has been with us all along. And this deepens and deepens and deepens, ever growing deeper as this is practiced with more and more awareness. And in the chapter of Vision for You, and by the way, the reason it's called a Vision for You is because spiritually awakened people have vision. Although I had a few before I ever got sober. And in the chapter of Vision for You on page 153, you arrive at the promise, in my opinion, of the 12 steps, of the 12th step promise. And it says, right on the top of page 153, the second line, then you will know what it means to give of yourself that others may survive and rediscover life. Not discover life, but rediscover life. Nobody's ever held up a test tube, you know, with a vial of life in it. Life is that ineffable force that animates form. I am being lived by life right now. This form that you're looking at is being lived by life. And when that life departs, that consciousness departs, this form will be left behind and will return to the earth again. But the life is eternal, and it is with you now. And could it be possible through this process, you can actually come into the consciousness of that life? Because life is God. Substitute the word life for God and you have it exactly. Life is in everything. The life that's living me is living you, is living Kirkan, is living Doni, is living Frank, is living everyone present here. It's living the cat, the dog, and it's one life and it's eternal. I cannot die. My body has passed away many, many times, but not that which lives within me. It's eternal. And that's what rediscovering life is all about. You will know what it means to give of yourself that others may survive and rediscover life. You will learn the full meaning of love thy neighbor as thyself, because you'll suddenly realize that your neighbor is you, like two fingers on the one hand. You know, we are individuations of the one body, but we are one. You don't look at your brother as separate from you anymore. You look at your brother as you. And so it takes the eyes of light to see the face of light, or if you will, the eyes of Christ to see the face of Christ. And all of the mystics say the same thing. I came that you might have life and have it more abundantly. Find the same statement from Buddha, the same statement from Krishna, the same statement from every enlightened being that's ever reached any degree of mastery, where he has kicked away the ladders of religion and found out the true essence of life, which is love. We are because of love. We are because of it. So the essence of the 12th step is love. This is a path to enlightenment. The first 4 chapters of the book, The Doctor's Opinion, Bill's Story, There is a Solution, More About Alcoholism, are all about step 1. And that ends on page 43. The rest of the book is entirely devoted to the spiritual journey to wholeness, to the transformation of consciousness, to the ever transformative aspect of consciousness, so that we can lift ourselves higher and higher and higher towards that oneness with the divine that is within us now and always we will be within us. That's the essence of step 12. That's the essence of our practice. So there you have it. Thank you for letting me share today. It's been very good for me. It's always uplifting to share, and especially in this group, which I have a great fondness for. And as Steve said, we've never actually physically met, but we've met in spirit many times. Tony, I have met. He stayed in my home one time. We had a great time together. So bless you all. Thank you. Have a great day.